Malcolm Muggeridge once described liberal college campuses as places where people go to educate themselves into imbecility. What we're about to see is a masterclass in such woke absurdities, but also a wonderful example of patient and critical thinking coming from a very impressive conservative speaker. Enjoy. Kristen Hawkins is a conservative pro-life leader who has quite the reputation for her ability to debate cogently and patiently with woke students on college campuses. And here's a sample of how patient critical thinking triumphs over the woke mob.
I just want to read you this poster that I have because I hear a lot of pro-lifers say that life begins at conception. So my poster reads, "Life begins when you understand living women matter more than potential babies."
What is it?
What do you mean?
If it's a potential baby, what is inside of a woman?
It's a fetus?
Is it living?
No.
How can it grow if it's not living?
Actually, that's like saying if an acorn is a tree.
When does the fetus become living?
That's actually a good question, but that line...
Yeah, of course, because you don't know it, because it's living. It's living.
How about you let her speak?
You're fundamentally denying science to validate your opinion.
You actively deny science.
All right, so as you can see, this is already a rather hostile exchange, at least from the side of the woke. So what Kristen Hawkins is doing, the pro-life speaker, is she's in effect trying to demonstrate to the student that the student actually finds herself in a logical trap. In denying that the fetus is living, in other words, a living human being, the student ends up denying the very precondition for its growth and development. If the fetus isn't growing or developing, what's your problem with it? So she fell into a bit of a logical trap, and then Kristen brought up scientific studies, which again, the student didn't seem to really know what to do with. But unfortunately for her, the overwhelming preponderance of scientific evidence is actually on the pro-life side. A recent doctoral dissertation written by University of Chicago student Stephen Jacobs found that among over 5,000 biologists regarding their opinion on when human life begins, 95% of those 5,000 biologists all agreed that life begins at conception. And it was an astonishing study because 63% of those biologists sampled considered themselves non-religious, and a full 89% claimed to be politically liberal. Only 11% identified themselves as conservatives. 92% of scientists sampled were registered Democrats. And yet, despite that overwhelmingly left-wing profile, they were almost unanimous, 95%, in recognizing that human life begins at the very moment of fertilization, at the moment a human zygote is formed in the womb. In other words, biologically, the only difference between a human zygote from the moment of conception and, say, a 95-year-old adult is food, air, water, and time. There is no new specified biological information added to the zygote from the moment of conception. So Kristen Hawkins isn't just drawing out the logical hurdles one encounters when trying to arbitrarily decide when life begins outside of conception. She actually has some pretty impressive scientific evidence backing up her position. And as you can see, woke college students don't really quite know what to do with that.
Wait, what science did I deny, Darby?
Okay, so let's look at some posters over here.
But
you don't have to be here.
I need you to tell me what science. You just made an accusation that I denied science. What science did I deny?
That it's a child inside of you. It is a clump of cells when
I'm a clump of cells. What makes me different?
That you were born. You were born.
So you don't. What you're arguing is that anything that is not born is not valuable of life.
I did not say that.
It's subjective. So when does a child or fetus or clump of cells, whatever you want to call it, when does this clump of cells or fetus become living?
When it can sustain its own life.
But when is that? When is the sustainability? No, when is sustainability?
Uh,
21?
About like 30 weeks to born, like 24, 30.
Because like how do you sustain life? Like my newborns aren't sustainable. You can't just have a newborn and they just like live on their own, right?
right.
They're not sustainable. They need help and assistance to survive. So is a newborn not worthy of life? Is a newborn not worthy of life?
Yeah, well, needless to say, the student didn't have an answer to Kristen's challenge. And again, this is precisely where logic and science walk hand in hand. If life doesn't begin when 95% of biologists say it begins, then, well, good luck trying to find a logically sustainable answer to that question, given that the answer is rooted more in a particular left-wing ideology than it is in any objective reality. You'll notice, too, something here. You could see by the student's frequent mannerisms, looking to her ideological comrades for help, you could see in real time, this phenomenon known as groupthink, which, this is something that Douglas Murray talks about in his book, The Madness of Crowds. Critical thinking is replaced by the arbitrary consensus of an ideological group. This is why such groups are often so rude. They're literally like gangs who aren't in the habit of thinking, but instead of reacting. And such reactions end up being badges of identity that shows one to be a faithful member of that group. So obviously the student had no idea how to even begin to answer this pro-life speaker's questions, and so she changed the subject.
I do have one thing to say to you. How is it that when my mom was in college 30 years ago, she was protesting the exact same thing that me and these wonderful other women and men on this side have been protesting? How is it? Why? Why are we still protesting? Why are we still having to talk about this issue? It is a basic human right to have an abortion, to have a choice.
The reason we're still having the question is because some people don't want to accept the natural consequences of heterosexual sex and be inconvenienced by another human life and want to selfishly choose to end human life in order to have their whims met. That is why you're still arguing.
Well, now that was a good answer, but we actually have some fascinating data that suggests another answer. And that is that far left woke activists like the student and her mother have actually been disappearing off the planet these last 30 years. This was precisely the conclusion of University of London scholar Eric Kaufman. He argued recently that liberal values undermine procreation precisely because liberal values undermine the family. Liberalism redefines having children as a mere lifestyle choice and nothing more. And you cannot redefine children as a mere lifestyle choice and expect your society to continue to repopulate. It's what Kaufman calls the soft underbelly of liberalism. In other words, secular liberalism entails its own demographic contradiction. Liberalism necessitates the freedom not to reproduce. And so, as it turns out, secular liberalism is an inherently feudal belief system that by its nature undermines civilizational continuity. And so we could see this actually in real time. AOC once questioned whether it was still good to have children, given the environmental crisis we're facing. She actually said, quote, "Our planet is going to hit disaster if we don't turn this ship around." And so it's basically like there's a scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. Is it okay to still have children? You see, that's not a civilizationally sustainable worldview. Any worldview that is demographically impoverished like that, for whatever reason, will inevitably be surpassed and indeed replaced by a worldview that is demographically abundant and rich. That, I believe, is at least in part responsible for why this woke college student is fighting such a futile battle, exemplified all the more by the futility of her thought. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. And you definitely want to check out my latest video on Jordan Peterson leaving Joe Rogan speechless on the Bible. You're not going to want to miss that. So make sure to click on the link and I'll see you over there. God bless.